All right, our next guest has plenty to say on Europe's debt problems, the Federal Reserve, and financial regulation reform. We've been watching this morning with the euro originally under quite a bit of pressure this morning. It was down as low as 122 before rebounding and picking up space. Hit a four-year low earlier this morning. Right now, though, you can see 123.4. So, again, keeping an eye on this gold prices. 1234, yeah, it's a cool number.
The average since its inception is 118. So they could still they can still argue we're above our average for the lifetime of the currency. But once it cracks that, I think the next technical trough would be 116, which is the lowest since 2005.
Wow. All right. Let's get to our next guest right now, Representative Ron Paul. He's a member of the Financial Services and Joint Economic Committees. And, Congressman, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
I'm not sure if you heard the conversation we were just having, but obviously the euro was under pressure earlier again this morning, hitting a four-year low. You had gold prices that originally this morning were quite a bit higher. This is something I guess you've seen coming for some time with the problems with Greece. You think this is just the beginning?
Yes, this shouldn't surprise anybody, but, you know, how long should we have been anticipating this? I've anticipated problems since 1971 because the system that replaced Bretton Woods was a non-viable system, and this is proving the point. So this is the unwinding of a system, and until we replace it with something else, you're going to continue to see this. Some people think that, you know, what's happening in Greece will spread to this country, and I see it somewhat differently. I see that the system that was devised in 1971, where we gained the power to issue the reserve currency of the world, as building a system around the world. So we literally created the system that spread, and it's still trusted. The dollar is still trusted, and people still buy treasury bills. But all of that will come to an end because the type of problem that Greece is following will eventually hit United States because everything has too much debt. And you can't correct the problems of debt with creating more debt and expect the Fed to endlessly create money and credit. That is not the answer, even though it makes people feel better and will sort of delay some of the problems that we have. But we're in for a lot more trouble as far as I can see.
Although we have seen a very strong global economy, there are a lot of companies and CEOs who have come and talked about the incredible strength they've seen. Is there a way that we can grow our way out of this debt that's been issued and get back on the right path?
I don't think so, unless you do some other things. You'd have to cut taxes drastically, and you'd have to cut spending drastically. Then you could, but politically you can't cut any spending. You can't cut spending from overseas, and you can't cut welfare spending. So people will resort to more spending, more deficits, and more inflation of the money supply. And that just, you know, temporizes things. But, you know, if you see a GDP number go up and say, oh, there's economic growth, it's about equivalent to the money that we've created. You don't have any more growth than the artificial stimulus of the money that we put in. And most people say, well, that's good. It's working. But it really isn't. We have not allowed the liquidation of debt. We have not allowed the elimination of the malinvestment. It's still in the system. We still have millions of houses to be sold. And Washington's struggling out there how to stimulate home building. Waiting just, you know, momentarily, when are we going to build houses again? And when are we going to manufacture automobiles again? And that is not going to come just by government spending more money and running up more debt.
No, you're right. But, Congressman, one of the ways that your party has been trying to cut back spending is to get rid of some of the earmarks. And I believe you are one of the congressmen who refuses to adhere to this GOP moratorium on earmarks.
Well, yes, but you have to understand what I'm talking about. I've never voted for an earmark because I never vote for appropriation bills. So, therefore, I'm on record of not voting for any of that spending. But what I make the point
Although this is, you were the
first,
you and Congressman Young were the first to submit earmark requests in violation of the moratorium.
Yeah. Okay, but that's a different issue. That issue is who designates how the money should be spent. To me, it's a constitutional issue. If you vote against an earmark when there's a single vote to cut $50 million out of some project, if you vote to do that, you just give it to the administration, the executive branch to spend, and that's wrong. It should always be the Congress that designates how this money should be spent. And besides, some return of highway funds is considered evil and an earmark, but if you designate $1 billion to build an embassy overseas, that's never an earmark. So I just don't like the process. But the most important thing is if you're a fiscal conservative, you will always vote against the appropriation because it's too much. Right. So I'm on record of never voting for an earmark. At the same time, I work very hard to protect the prerogatives of the Congress, the responsibilities of the Congress, and never delivering more power to the executive branch.